What's going on, everybody? So in this video, I wanted to talk about why I think it's a good idea to continuously buy Bitcoin. Now, I buy Bitcoin on a weekly basis, and I'm not a crypto bro. I don't really pay too much attention to the meme coins and all the latest news when it comes to all these different types of coins. But I do think Bitcoin is a super important investment, especially for younger people to get into. And before I started investing in Bitcoin, I didn't really believe in it, and that was the main reason why, is because I didn't really understand it. So I wanted to make this video to kind of help you understand Bitcoin if you don't already, and why I think it's potentially a really good investment for you, as long as you're allocating just a small percentage of your portfolio. I don't think it's something you should necessarily dump all your money into, but if you could allocate 5, maybe 10%, depending on how much risk you're willing to tolerate into Bitcoin, I think it can prove in the long run to be very valuable. So to first, I want to start off by kind of explaining Bitcoin and how it works. So Bitcoin is a decentralized digital currency. So there's no banks and there's no middlemen that control Bitcoin. What makes Bitcoin special is how it's created. So Bitcoin is mined, right? And this is done using a process called proof of work. I'm not going to get too into the technicalities of Bitcoin, but basically what that means is there's thousands of computers around the world, and they're competing to solve complex math problems. When one solves it, a new block is added to the blockchain, and therefore a new Bitcoin is created as a reward. Sounds really confusing to wrap your head around, but once again, that's kind of the back end of it and the technicalities of it. What's cool about this is there's only 21 million Bitcoin that will ever exist. And that's hard coded into Bitcoin's system. So, unlike the US dollar, you can't just print more Bitcoin or create more Bitcoin. Once we reach that cap of 21 million Bitcoin, that's it. It's done. That will be all the Bitcoin to exist in the world. And that's what gives it its unique scarcity, and that's why people call it digital gold. So, kind of to expand on that topic of digital gold, gold has always been seen as a store of value. Even to this day, people buy gold, or they'll buy an ETF, in the stock market that holds gold. But gold is, it's hard to move, it's hard to verify, it's hard to store. Bitcoin takes the same scarcity as gold, and it puts it on the internet. So it's borderless, it's secure, and it's transparent. Now, the cool thing, and the reason it gets compared to gold a lot, is because, if you think about gold, right? Gold is a natural resource. We can't continue to create gold. We can make fake gold, for like jewelry and whatnot, but actual gold, there's only a certain amount of it in the world. And once it all gets mined and processed and harvested, it's done. And that's why people continue to buy gold, because there's a scarcity to it. And that's how Bitcoin is. Now, the reason scarcity is important when it comes to these assets is because let's look at the US dollar, right? The US dollar gets heavily infected by inflation. And the main reason I like to buy Bitcoin is to protect myself against the devaluation of the US dollar. So here's an example. Since 1971, when the US left the gold standard, the dollar bill, right, so a $1 bill, has lost over 85% of its purchasing power. So your savings account, or anywhere where you just store cash, and look, I'm a bad example of this because I store a lot of cash in a savings account, but it's worth less money every year that goes by. And you're thinking, well, how is it worth less money? If I have $10,000 in my account and I don't touch it, I'm going to have $10,000 in my account for the next 10 years. That's correct. The actual money stays in there, but the value of it goes down. The reason the value of it goes down is because the US, we're in a huge debt crisis, and we're constantly printing new money. Also, inflation keeps rising, and your money just sitting there in a savings account isn't doing anything to beat and to hedge against inflation. And that's where Bitcoin comes in. With Bitcoin, it's a fixed supply equals scarcity, and that's what offers that as a hedge. It doesn't inflate, and it doesn't get devalued by politics. So I'm not sitting here saying that I think, in the next 10 years, Bitcoin's going to replace the US dollar. All I'm saying is I think Bitcoin is a good place to store long-term wealth just in case the system keeps trending the way it's been. And if we're being honest, every year that goes by, the US goes more into debt. The dollar bill loses more value because we print more of it. So Bitcoin's a really good hedge against that. And that's kind of the most important, I would say, talking point for Bitcoin, is because you guys really need to understand how important it is by Bitcoin being scarce, because that's what gives it its inherent value. Now, this is another, pretty important thing, is I use it, like I said, as a hedge against the US dollar and not a get rich quick. I don't put my money in Bitcoin to hope next week it's going to 10x. You have to be realistic. I also don't put 100% of my money into Bitcoin. While I think it's a great investment, Bitcoin, it also has a lot more volatility than standard stocks. So, whereas a standard stock could drop 5% in a month, Bitcoin realistically could drop 15% in a month. And you kind of have to deal with that volatility and deal with that risk. So I'll say this, most of my portfolio is an index fund. I have some cash, I have some, in a high yield savings. But I would say I have about 5% of my total portfolio in Bitcoin. And I think, it's a great way to hedge, and it's a great way to diversify and get exposure to something new. And guess what? If Bitcoin goes to $0 tomorrow, well, I lose 5% of my total, my total portfolio, and it's a learning lesson. Now, what's cool about Bitcoin, especially as the days go by, is the institutional adoption is really ramping up. So, before, a couple years ago, people were like, oh, Bitcoin is just internet money. Well, now you have people like BlackRock and Fidelity that have launched, Bitcoin ETFs, which are a great way to also invest into Bitcoin if you don't want to actually buy Bitcoin. Banks are exploring Bitcoin custody, and countries like El Salvador are actually using it as, legal tender. So you can actually, go to El Salvador and use Bitcoin for a lot of things. Now, that doesn't guarantee Bitcoin's success, but it shows that the financial world is kind of starting to shift and take Bitcoin a lot more seriously than they would have, a couple years ago. And that's super important, as well, because that can show you, well, hey, even though Bitcoin is $100,000, $110,000 a share right now, or a coin, a lot of people think, I'm too late to the game. It's $109,000 a share. I'm not going to buy Bitcoin because I'm way too late. But that's the thing. Bitcoin, it could reach $1 million a coin, 10 million a coin. No one really knows. And we're still so early into the game of cryptocurrency. I mean, cryptocurrency is still such a new topic. Like, think about how long currency has been around for. And Bitcoin's only been around for 12 years. Whereas currency, I mean, they've had it around for thousands of years, of traditional ways of buying and selling things, whether it was trading or, whatever that might be. So that's why I believe that it's never too late, even now, at $109,000 a share to buy Bitcoin, because I personally think if the financial setting in, shift is continuing at the rate it is, especially with technology and everything, I think Bitcoin really has a prosperous long-term future. And like I said, when I'm saying long-term, I'm talking about like long-term. Like I think in the next 20 years, I'll profit very well off of Bitcoin by doing what I'm doing now. So to get into what I'm doing now, I'm not trading Bitcoin. I'm not timing dips or, having AI crypto bots buy Bitcoin. Kind of like I told you guys in my previous video. I keep my investing very simple, very level-headed, that works with my plan. Right now, I dollar cost average, get ready for the total here, $30 a week into Bitcoin. That is it. $30 a week into Bitcoin. I know it's nothing crazy. I know I'm not rich. I'm not one of these people online saying, oh, I'm buying, I'm buying 3 Bitcoin a day. I literally buy $30 a week. That's what I can afford. That's what my risk tolerance is for myself. And that's all I do. I sit there, I buy $30 a week, whether it's up 100% or down 100%. I'm buying $30 a week of Bitcoin because over time, I believe it will it will prosper, and that $30 a week is really going to pay off in the long term, because I'm treating Bitcoin like a long-term investment. So to kind of wrap it up here, like I said, I'm 25, I'm not rich, but I believe in slowly building wealth, and I think Bitcoin definitely has a role in that. And it's not about hype, it's not about protecting, it's all about protecting time, your money from a system that doesn't always have your back. And Bitcoin definitely might not be for everyone, but I'm getting into it and I think it's for me. So if you guys found this helpful, definitely let me know what you think about Bitcoin, and let me know if you're buying Bitcoin. And I hope you guys have a good day.